Welcome to the Insum Insider.
Welcome to the Inside. This is the Insum Insider, your source for Oracle Apex tips, techniques, methodologies, and really wherever that discussion takes us. I'm your host, Monty Latchley, coming to you from H-Town, the beautiful Houston, Texas. And with me today is my good friend and member of the Insum family, Michelle Scamini. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Monty.
At the helm, keeping us on time and task, is our producer, French-Canadian Mark Rule. Mark, we certainly appreciate what you do for us. It's Thursday, November 19th, and it's episode 22. And thank you for spending a piece of your afternoon with us. Coming to you today through the miracle of StreamYard. Michelle?
StreamYard better be paying us something at some point. You're giving them a lot of airtime.
We are, but we really enjoy the platform. I'm so happy that you got us over onto StreamYard. Our guests have had nothing but good things to say about it. Our attendees have had nothing but good things to say about it. So good call, Michelle.
Thank you. And speaking of attendees, if you don't mind, Monty, so like we said before, we don't actually know who's joining, who's watching. So if you're here, pop in a comment, say hello, just so that we know who's with us here today. We'd really appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely. Michelle, we have a great show today. I want to personally explain how important this show is for me, because when we start our career in IT, there's certain influencers, there's certain mentors that kind of help us along and kind of shorten that learning curve. One of them, for an Oracle database developer, one of them is Tom Kite. Ask Tom back in the day. If you're an Oracle database developer, you spent time on Ask Tom, a lot of time on Ask Tom. If you were an Oracle database developer, you're doing a lot of PL SQL work. You've got Steven Feuerstein's book on your desk, open, and it's just as far as the PL SQL Bible, as far as I'm concerned,
full of scribbles. If you're anything like me,
dog-eared pages, and we're lucky enough to have someone here with us today that I think belongs on Oracle's Mount Rushmore, because he did so much for the development community over so long. It's just, personally, this is a big deal. I'm going to try to keep it together. Try not to
Why don't we bring him
joined by the one and the only Steven Feuerstein. Steven, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and joining us on the Insum Insider.
Great to be here, and thank you for those kind words.
Well, every word of it is true. Every word of it is true. What are you up to? It's for now and forever, you're just, in my mind, going to be the PL SQL evangelist. I thought about you and Bryn when I think about PL SQL. Well, now I think about you. It's just you. So what's a normal day for you these days? You got another book in the works, or what's going on?
Well, I'd say, first of all, using the word normal in the year 2020, just like, why even bother? So we always adjust to the new normal around us. I think that's what we do as humans and mammals, et cetera. But wow, no normal. Now, having said that, I got to say that, and I feel bad about this in some way, with the pandemic hitting, it actually didn't affect my life on a day-to-day basis all that much. I moved from Chicago to North Carolina a couple years ago, so I'm not next to my grandkids anymore, so I don't see them all that often. I was already pretty much avoiding travel whenever possible. Now everybody else is doing what I was doing. And I already did a lot of self-isolating because I spent a lot of time out in the woods removing invasives and helping the trees in my local community flourish. So I've been doing all those same things. Plus, I got a couple of little dogs. So what do I do with my day these days? I spend still too much time of it in front of my computer, and they then surround me. I spend a lot of time outdoor with the dogs, moving them around. Yes, that's my personal Twitter handler. Yes. And
that's where you show a lot of what you do with the invasives and so on. Yep.
And then I go outdoors and literally I'm now removing invasives in over 50 different locations, 50, in the Chapel Hill, Carbo area. I lead 2 different teams of volunteers on weekly, monthly basis doing the same thing. And one of the things I've learned is how much one individual can do, whether it's working in database, whether it's software, preferably not working in software. We can get back to that. But anyway, each one of us can have an enormous impact as an individual. You just have to find your niche, find the thing that you want to really focus on, and you can
on
do
the
wonders.
invasive though. I know you're putting in a lot of work, a lot of hard work. You've got other people involved. Is it something that you're actually, you said one person can make a difference. Is it something that you're actually seeing a lot of progress around, and you're able to see that once you eradicate these species, are you able to do you have to, is it something you have to return to every Saturday morning because they come right back, or are you able to?
So let me say, first of all, we could definitely spend the whole hour just on this. And I know you'll cut off, so I appreciate this much focus on it. Generally, I'd say the way I would frame it is that when it comes to invasives, and an invasive is a species that was brought to a new location, usually by human accidental, movement and all the traveling we do around the world. And it didn't evolve to be here, so it doesn't have natural resistance, natural enemies, essentially, to keep it in balance. Some non-natives are fine, they flourish, but they don't take over. Invasives just spread out and wipe out local flora and fauna, literally end up killing massive trees and all the life that goes with them. My rule of thumb with invasives is you can't win the war, but you can win every battle. So, for example, I'll drive down the road and I'll see wisteria, this beautiful vine with these beautiful, heavy, fragrant flowers. It's an amazing plant. And there's a native wisteria, but the ones that are here from Asia will cover 200-foot trees and bring them down. It's just amazing. So what I'll do is cut the vines at the base, and that'll kill the wisteria all the way up. And that will free the tree at the top to get the rain and the wind and the sun that they weren't getting for years. They will regrow unless we use herbicide, and I'm starting to do more of that. But for years, I've not done any of that. So yes, every year I pretty much go back. I cycle through these 50 locations and cut them back again and again. And for me, it's like, what better thing do I have to do with my life than save a tree?
You need to go
save
down
all
to
the life that comes with it.
You need to go down to Mississippi. That kudzu, man, it looks like you could see it growing down there.
We've got kudzu here. It's not as bad as I
really?
thought it was going to be. Oh yeah, no, there's kudzu in North Carolina for sure. Kudzu is pretty nasty, and especially that one, you can pretty much can't get rid of it. The root systems in those are just amazing, but they're not hard to cut back, and you can save all the trees. Anyway.
Stephen, I did put in your Twitter handle, just if anybody's interested to learn more. You've shared some really impressive photos of some of the work.
Incredibly satisfying.
Before and after, so I really
I got to say, for many people, the question of what's the meaning of life? Why am I here? To me, I don't have that question. Every time I go out and save a tree and save different plants, and more than just that, but it fills me with a profound sense of purpose and meaning. It's really been something.
Well, it's no doubt you bring the passion. I
am an obsessive compulsive person in all aspects, no question about it.
That one thing before we leave kudzu talk, because the people are showing up going, I thought we were going to talk PL SQL when others know. But before we leave the kudzu talk, you said that the pandemic hasn't impacted you to the extent it's impacted other people, and I agree. I think we really are. We really have an ability to continue to do our work. We had a distributed workforce before the pandemic, so when I hear these people say we're all in it together, that kind of bothers me, because there have been people that had to have sacrificed much more than those of us in IT, and because we were able to do things remotely. And there's other vocations that in the service industry and stuff like that, they've been parked, and so
what's clear is that
probably wouldn't agree that we're all in this together.
An economy based around the service economy is very bad news. We became a mono economy and became way too dependent on one aspect of that, and really that really hit everybody hard. Right, I agree that we're impacted very differently. But we are all in this together, because even those of us who have let's say the luxury of living relatively unchanged lives, when we go out, that's where we show our commitment to other people, and we wear a mask.
I agree with that. Michelle, I think we should talk about something
technical.
More
technical. I definitely, Steven has. I am lucky enough to know Steven personally, and I know you have some all sorts of interests and passions, and I want to definitely touch more on those a little bit later. But I thought I'd love for you to share more about what your current role at Oracle. I know you lead a team of developer advocates. Our audience is full of Apex developers. Wondering if you could share a little bit more about what you do, and maybe talk about some resources that they might want to check out. Anything you want to share about this team of advocates that you lead?
Sure. So a little bit of background. So I rejoined Oracle in 2014. I joined Oracle initially in 1987. Spent 5 years with the company, left in 1992. But I never left Oracle database and never left PL SQL. In 1994, I published my first book. You can see the big orange binding back there. And that literally changed my life within a year. And I've done nothing but PL SQL ever since, largely with Quest and then Dell. Anyway, came back to Oracle in 2014 and was basically given the opportunity to clone myself. So I wasn't the only one who was out there doing evangelizing. We call it advocacy because we want to advocate for the users to our counterparts in Oracle, not just from Oracle out to our users. I was given an opportunity to build a team. So I was able to hire some really, really great people. In the Apex world, I'm sure people know Dan McGann. He was on the team for 5 years. He's now working on the COVID app development work that we're doing really intensively. And Chris Saxon and Connor McDonald, who are now running Ask Tom. They took over from Tom when Tom retired in 2016 and have done a fantastic job. And we've expanded the website, expanded its functionality, answering more questions than ever before. They're doing an amazing job.
Yeah,
and also Blaine Cart.
1 second there, Steve. Before you leave, I was very surprised at how Ask Tom didn't miss a beat, because he, Ask Tom was Tom, and those two guys came in there, and they are doing wonderful. It hasn't missed a beat. They're experts in every sense of the word.
They're the real deal, not me. I'm kind of an amateur. I tell this to people over and over again. I'm just a lucky guy who fell into a technology that I could handle. I have almost no formal training in computer science, no degree in computer science. I can't do the really hard stuff, and I don't know generally the database very well at all. And SQL, I'm sort of okay at. Chris and Connor, and I got to say, especially Connor, they are database rock stars. And I'd say the most positive impact I'll have had at Oracle since rejoining is hiring them. I mean, Dan and Blaine is the other team member I hired. They're great, but Chris and Connor especially, they're mainstays for the community now, and so that's really great. So our job is to help you all succeed with our technology. Obviously, it's expensive. Obviously, it's not as easy to use as we'd like it to be, and we're working on all those aspects. The bottom line, though, is we have lots and lots of users who depend on Oracle database to run a lot of the world. I like to remind my team and really everybody in our community, especially inside Oracle, that Oracle database has got to be one of the most important pieces of software of the 20th century. Yeah. Okay, if Oracle hadn't done what it did, somebody else would have, maybe, probably, but the fact is, it was Oracle database. It was Oracle database that made so many applications so possible, that enabled companies to move forward, enabled so much progress to happen, and allow bad things to happen too, because technology is used for good and bad. But we've played a really, really critical role in the information age, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of everybody else who's doing it. Now, in terms of the current days at Oracle, so our job is to essentially evangelize and help our users, videos, blogs, way too many tweets, et cetera, et cetera. But I got to say that to me, the most exciting thing going on inside Oracle and Oracle database, and has been, and this has been true for years, is Application Express. I can't tell you how amazing it is to me on a daily basis. It amazes me that I, Steven Feuerstein, can build websites. What? Really? I mean, all I know is PL SQL and a little bit of SQL. Apex allows us to build and deliver really great websites. And of course, as it gets more and more powerful, we're able to deliver many different kinds of websites for different kinds of use cases. Whereas in the earlier days, it was probably a bit more constrained in terms of what Apex was good for. So, that just blows my mind that I can do that. And I don't know really any HTML and CSS. We got somebody else, his name is Eli Feuerstein, just a coincidence, who does all the front end work for the DevGem, Oracle DevGem and Ask Tom, our main two sites. And I think, by the way, that's why Apex has become so popular within the database community, why there's so much excitement about it. Because we're not just writing code, whatever code we write and don't write in our low-code environment, we're delivering applications to users. And there's a sense of excitement and positive feedback loop that happens with that you don't get by writing a stored procedure. You just don't. You'll never get it. So, we're working hard inside Oracle to get people more and more excited about all the different parts of the Oracle database stack. And there's tons of great stuff in there. Spatial, text searching, mapping. But the bottom line is that when you build something that somebody can see and play with and give you feedback on, that's where the real excitement lies these days, for sure.
Yeah, I like the fact that it's so extensible. Like if you've got a JavaScript library out there that, you can just incorporate it right into your web app. It really, it's an amazing tool. I remember, early on when I started using it, I was thinking, this already does everything I need it to do. How can this be better than it is? And that was 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
And it continues to improve. I like the fact that it's always in development. They're really aggressively, releasing, different versions every year. And it's just, there's just no stopping it. Oracle, there's a clear commitment from Oracle for Apex. Yeah. They drink their own champagne. I mean, within the halls of Redwood Shores, you see Apex app after
it's like a virus. Or Apex is just roared through Oracle in terms of the numbers of people building apps, getting up to speed. And by the way, I don't think I'll be saying anything wrong here. Who knows? I'm so bad at being a corporate citizen. But one of the challenges I think with Apex, and we're obviously going to be talking about stuff like this, as is true with many, many products, its strengths can also be its weaknesses. So for example, in PL SQL, one of the most wonderful things about PL SQL is that it's so tightly integrated with SQL. I can just write a select statement, write an update, write it whenever I need it. No JDBC, no concatenation nonsense. Wonderful. That's also a weakness of PL SQL because we make it so easy to do. Database developers don't pay enough attention to the SQL that they're writing. They just drop it in all over the place. And then we create a problem for ourselves. I think we have the same potential happening with Apex because it's so easy to build these applications with Apex. So much of it is point and click and low/no code that when we do step into the SQL, and especially the PL SQL, we don't give it enough attention. So number one, we tend to build, I think, a growing amount of technical debt in there. And the second one is that a lot of Apex developers, I don't think, have necessarily a lot of database expertise, understandably. And again, that's a strength. But the problem is that if you don't know SQL well, if you don't really leverage SQL, let's even put aside PL SQL for a moment. If you're not keeping up with SQL and leveraging SQL, then your app might work pretty well now, but wow, everybody loves that app. And now there are 100 users and 1,000 users and on. And the data volume starts to grow. And suddenly you realize, I have to pay attention to the internals. I have to pay attention to that layer down there. Yeah. And I think we're going to see as Apex grows and there's more and more of a community and longer life for these applications, I think there's going to be more of a demand on those developers and on consultancies like Insum to provide database expertise, not just Apex expertise.
Totally agree. And
I definitely, I definitely want to get back to that in a bit, but there's an interesting question from Rich about your book. I wonder if you want to address that. Is there an edition 7 in the works?
Sure. So OPP, Oracle PL SQL Programming, has been in its 6th edition for a bunch of years now. It's through 12.1, I think it actually is, maybe 12.2. And so the answer, Rich, actually is no. There is not an edition 7 in the works right now. And the sad fact of the matter is that at this point, O'Reilly is not giving me a green light to do a 7th edition. They don't want to do a 7th edition right now, though they're not foreclosing on the possibility in the future. I think there are a number of reasons behind it. One reason is that it's simply a massive book. It's 1,500 pages long, and we've got at least 200 pages to add to it. We have to figure out what to take out, and the production of a book that size is a very large effort. And I think they look at that compared to, well, I guess how many they expect to sell. I think they sell a whole boatload of them. Anyway, right. The answer is, do not wait for edition 7. Go and buy your 6th edition now. Don't come up to me and say, or contact me in Zoom or whatever and say, Steven, oh man, I love your book. I've got the 1st edition here. Look, it's got all these tabs. Like, 1st edition? Are you kidding me? It's true that probably 80% of that book hasn't changed since 1994. I mean, besides fixing, bug fixes and clarity. That's wonderful. I made a very good choice by focusing on PL SQL. Actually, when I first signed the contract, I agreed to write 400 pages on PL SQL. And I thought to myself, 400 pages, I don't know if I can do that. Well, I think it was 1,200 pages later, we had to take 400 pages out to publish the first edition. And they were about writing PL SQL and SQL forms and SQL reports. And I should have just published a second book right then. But anyway, that all went away. But if I had written a book about SQL forms and Oracle forms, and oh my God, you change, like an Apex book, you've got to change it, update it almost every year. PL SQL, it changes, it gets better, you get fixes, but the core, same with SQL, the core technology has been unchanged and powering applications and making business successful since like the early 80s in PL SQL. That's really amazing.
Such a strength of the strength of the language. Returning to what you said earlier about one of the strengths of Apex is actually a weakness, because you can put code anywhere. You can write a SQL statement right there. I think also, the speed of the hardware and that kind of stuff. We used to have, old timers like us. I hate to be that guy, but we used to have to really be disciplined because there wasn't a whole processors were
really
slower.
We did.
What I'm saying
that's
is,
what I did wrong back then.
Nobody's buying that, Steve.
But, I'm a very undisciplined programmer. I'm definitely one of those guys. You do what I say, not what I do.
Anybody? Okay, you listening in on the webcast. Anybody wants to call BS on Steven? Feel free.
Okay.
Nobody's buying that.
You don't see my code. I'll show you some of my code later.
I'm betting some of his code has exception when others then null.
Yes, but usually if it's there, there's a comment that says why.
Okay.
All right.
Then I think
I thought I'm pretty sure I saw you present one said never ever ever do that.
Yeah.
No, that's more like Tom Kite. Tom was really good at the black and white stuff. Triggers are bad. Never have one other than null. I tend to live in a grayer world, and it gets grayer and grayer and grayer, blended as the years go by. I've got some absolute feelings about things like killing life that we don't need to kill. That's pretty absolute for me. But in terms of an absolute around PL SQL, the bottom line is that we have all sorts of different requirements, all sorts of different scenarios. And there's almost always going to be a reason for something. Like we have GoTo in PL SQL. I've used it. I'm not sure I can justify it, but I've used it. Anyway, Monty.
Are there?
So we used to not have to pay we had to pay a lot of attention. You're saying because we got the big iron now, we have to pay less attention.
It certainly helps. Like back in the day, you couldn't be, in my opinion, you couldn't be as sloppy. You can write less than optimal code, and you're kind of covered because we've got faster processors and that kind of stuff. I got a question. New lines of COBOL are being written today. 20 years from now, 25 years, 50 years from now, are we going to be writing PL SQL? I mean, who would have thought that COBOL programmers would be in such demand right now?
And I think there was something going on recently where they were strongly in demand. I can't remember what the topic was. Not obviously 2000.
That stuff won't be rewritten. I mean, it would cost so much more to rewrite it than it would just to fix what's there. I think PL SQL is going to be the same way. There's billions and billions of lines out there of PL SQL, and those are just.
Well, I think there's the legacy side, certainly.
Yeah.
As long as those apps live, and they seem to be living for a long time. But also, as long as Oracle database is being used, it's likely that PL SQL, well, it'll certainly be an active technology. The question of how many people use it is a somewhat different question. I think part of what you'll be seeing in the coming years is that the Oracle database will become more open to allowing other people to use different technologies in the database. So the MLE, the multiple language engine, that should be coming out soon. I can't remember the details. Anyway, at some point in the future, I expect, though I will not predict, and you should not make buying decisions based on it, that you'll be able to write JavaScript in the database, run JavaScript, run Python, run your choice of language. And at that point, that'll probably be an excellent test for PL SQL, because people might say, I can write Python on the database, but maybe I don't want to. This is so much simpler and easier. So I think it'll be there for decades to come. It's hard to say. Chances are I'd say that you'll see the decline in usage, and it has been declining over the years, and it'll stabilize, and it'll kind of level off and stay at a solid. I mean, even right now, I think on the TOB index, PL SQL is still in the top 20 of all programming languages. That's amazing. And it speaks to many aspects of our community, to the technology itself. So yeah, I think it'll be there for a long while to come. I don't think that anybody should try to be just a PL SQL developer or just a database developer. I think you're lucky, if that's what you want to do, lucky to be able to do that. Certainly these days, you pretty much have to know at least some JavaScript, some Java.
Yeah.
You can't be afraid of squiggles. That's what it comes down to. You just can't afford to. You got to give up that fear of squiggles.
Are you still as passionate about like the table APIs as I felt like you used to be? And I worked at a place prior to joining Insum where they were really really insistent on us using table APIs, and actually I loved it. It was easy. I didn't have to think a lot. It made coding easy, and they followed your guidelines on QP, TP, all the XP packages and everything. It was great. I enjoyed it.
Well, then that to some extent that's the answer. It worked for you guys, and if it works for you, it's a good thing. So in terms of TAPIs, table APIs, there's been ongoing controversies or questions about this topic. Second, probably only to how should you format your code. I have this feeling that I format I uppercase keywords, lowercase application identifiers, and obviously many people hate it. And I'm like, go do whatever you want. That's fine. I find it useful for me. So as an overall, TAPIs versus ZAPIs, I guess you call them X APIs. Tom Kite was really strong. This is another one of his black and whites. TAPIs suck. Never use a TAPI. And you should always use transaction APIs instead, higher level APIs. So my feeling generally is that my position has always been mischaracterized. The important point is not what kind of API you use, but that you use an API, that you hide the underlying SQL, you hide the underlying business rules. Because if you don't put a layer of code around something and you expose it, then you're going to do the same thing in multiple places. You lose control, hard to maintain, hard to optimize. So the key thing to me is the principle of single point of definition, right? Declare it once or dry, right? What does that stand for? I can't remember now. Anyway, I like SPOD. Spodify your code, single point of definition. And then then the question becomes, well, a table API means you have a procedure to do an insert, a procedure to do an update. You have a function to do a query. And the common pushback against table APIs is it's too low level. So for example, I'm writing a procedure. I need to get the name of an employee. I need to get the name of a department. So I call two functions to get those two pieces of information. And Tom and many others and myself would say, no, don't do that. One select statement gets both pieces of information. So yes, that's an abuse of a table API. It doesn't mean that table APIs are bad. It means they should be used properly. Now, the way I would do it these days, back in the old days, and what you're talking about with the TPs and the XPs and the CP, is I had tools that would generate all those packages for me. Yeah. And I would not barely do any custom coding. These days, I don't rely on the generators like that. What I'll do is I'll use APIs, but it'll be blended. There'll be a package, for example, the DevGym, which is one of my main sites where you can do quizzes and workouts and classes. We have classes. So there's a DG class manager package. That's where I put in all the API elements for managing classes. Some of those are TAPIs. I might have a procedure to insert one row. I might have a query to return one row. But then there's much more other stuff, and it's not all. Sometimes I generate a starting point, then move them into my management package. But the key thing is the API. Don't get hung up on what the kind of API is. Figure out what works for you.
It definitely worked for them. I mean, and now, with
don't repeat yourself. DRY. Don't repeat yourself. Thank you.
But there are strong opinions, to this day about exactly the benefits of them. I've had guys. We've had these conversations just in the last few months. So,
and I would say, and this is probably true in general. So, having hard conversations between polarized positions. What does that sound like? Wow. Life these days as a result of many things, including social media. But we won't get started me ranting on that one. But here's the thing I'd suggest for anybody who gets into these kinds of conversations. Number one, you want to learn from the other person. Pushing your viewpoint, insisting that you're right and they're wrong will never change anybody's mind, will just make them think less of you, and you'll never learn from them. So if somebody says to me, Steven, table APIs are terrible, they result in nasty code. Well, Tell me what's your experience been with table APIs? What's the concern you have? And conversely, don't get into a theoretical discussion. To me, I can explain why table APIs or parts of them have benefited my code.
Yeah.
And this goes to me, so to me, the fundamental thing is, don't reject another person's subjective experience. So for example, I'll walk down the street with my wife. I was telling you guys this the other day. And I'll say, wow, that person looks like George Clooney. She'll look and she'll say, no, he doesn't. And I'm like, well, he does to me. And, you know, I have my own mind. I have my own experiences. I have my own way of seeing and living in the world. There's never any good to be gotten out of rejecting another person's life experiences.
Oh,
now, for example,
true.
Tom Kite, he has never been able to benefit from Tappies. I don't know what Tom's application development experience was. Obviously, he built the first version of Ask Tom. I don't know how much else he did like active development. I've pretty much always been doing active application development. A lot of it's been pretty bad, but anyway, a lot of it. And I have found in my experience that Tappies have worked for me in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
So to me, it's not a matter of I'm right, Tom's wrong. It's like Tom has had different experiences and different lessons learned that have benefited him. Mine are different from his.
Yeah. Well,
But
like
I think
said,
the core principles are what really make the difference.
If you could be more productive, then be more productive. You're using the tapping. You were going to say something, Michelle?
That it's great advice, but I think we've probably all seen people doing certain things very badly. Is there something that you just consistently see people doing wrong or doing badly? Something that you wish they would just lowercase in key. That's the worst that people do. All right.
We wish, right? Well, you know, I got to say, I don't see a lot of other people's code. I mean, I see stuff occasionally. I would say that probably one of the biggest issues just in the back-end side of things now, and then I'll talk about inside Apex, is lack of modularization. So you'll end up with these procedures that are hundreds of lines long that just are, and then formatting becomes a real issue. I don't mean lower versus upper, just like consistent formatting, because you can't even make sense of what they wrote. So I think that the biggest issue is that people start to write and they write and they write and they write and they write, and they never go back and kind of restructure it. So for example, if I'm building a complicated procedure, there are actually two ways to go about it that can both lead to the end result, which is well modularized and understandable code. One approach is top down. So I think to myself, what are the big steps that I need to take to do the job? Like literally a hierarchy of detail. So the procedure that I'm writing might be, you know, first update balances and analyze this. And so I'll literally create procedures called update balances, analyze X, do this, do that. And these are local modules, nested modules in my procedure. My procedure has other procedures in it. And I basically go through layering of detail and kind of work my way down through a top-down design. It's a very powerful approach and can be very helpful. The other approach is bottom-up, which is I'm just going to kind of work through the details. I'm not really sure what I'm going to be doing in this code. I'm going to just start writing code. And that works really well too. And I'll write and I'll write and I'll write and I'll write. But then when I'm done, when I get it to work, then I should go back and modularize it and take out those first 50 lines and say, that's update balances. Next 75 lines, that's analyze X. And then move them into these modules and make the code, I think, much easier to understand and manage. And by the way, not everybody agrees with even that technique. Bryn Llewellyn hates nested modules. He thinks they should just be nested blocks. I like, what are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. But
I didn't hear you say you write the test first or anything like that.
Yeah, so there was a time when I was very, very big and hot on regression testing, automated testing, test-driven development. One of the things I've decided as I've gotten older, and I'm getting pretty old, is I try to reduce the amount of hypocrisy in my life. And the bottom line, I confess, is that I've written several testing tools, and I agree that they're really, really great. UTPL SQL, for example, especially in its new incarnation, completely rebuilt. None of my code is in it whatsoever. Really powerful stuff. Quest Code Tester for Oracle was a really great low-code testing environment. I never really use them myself. So I don't do test-driven development. I don't spend a lot of time writing regression tests, partly because it's just a part of my job, and that's a terrible excuse, but I don't have time. Anyway, so I've backed off from pushing really hard on it. I promote UTPL SQL and promote testing is a good thing to do, but you know, I'm not going to get up in front of you and I'll make anybody feel bad because they haven't sat down and written their test script before they wrote their code.
Confession,
but it's certainly a good idea to do.
Confession is good for the soul, Steven.
Yeah. All right, and here, so there's a question. What about SQL performance of pop-up LOV items based on a database link view? Well, that's a SQL question. Well, I don't know SQL. I don't PL SQL. Well, I think so. What about it? Depending on your
Ask Connor.
database link
Sounds like,
and
yeah.
the cost of going over to get that data, it could impact your performance. I don't know if there's much to do about it. Certainly, I doubt there's much you can do inside Apex to do about it. So you just want to basically take the query out of the LOV and do everything you can to optimize it, and then it'll work inside your LOV. That would be my quick answer to that one. Sorry. Going back to one other thing, so I talked about, the problem that one of the biggest problems I have is people not modularizing and creating chunkable, maintainable code.
Mm-hmm.
I think very, very closely linked to that is the biggest problem I see for Apex developers, which is that, again, they want to stay in the declarative no-code environment of pointing and clicking, and we can do more and more and more of that with every release. So then when they have to write some SQL or PL SQL, they go into those little boxes, they throw in the code, and get back to their nice high-level screens as quickly as they can. And what you end up with is these applications with a lot of code just spread out all over the place. And that's a real problem because it's hard to manage. And again, Apex is getting better in terms of giving you analysis tools to go through your code. And 20.2, I think, has some really big steps there. But the main lesson I would have for anybody doing Apex development is that you should have very, very tiny amounts of code inside the application builder, inside your process boxes and your queries for LOVs. Anything complex should be moved into a view that you select from instead. And obviously that needs to be done with care as well. If you have views within views within views, it can be a performance issue. And as much as your PL SQL as possible should be put into packages, procedures and functions, and you simply call procedures and functions inside your
Take your time, Steven.
Is that? I was like, oh, because my Wi-Fi constantly blips out. I thought that was me. I think we lost Steven. There you are.
Well, I'm here. Okay.
You're back.
And I can show you, by the way, examples of my own code where I've started with a nice clean environment where none of my processes are more than 10 lines long. Begin, call procedure, end. And it's hard to do. It's hard to maintain the discipline around that. So I can show you elements in the DevGen where I've got 150 lines of multiple SQL statements and calling procedures. It's a mess. And I will go back, I swear, and refactor that at some point. But the main thing as an Apex developer is try to maintain some discipline. Keep those boxes small. Always look for opportunities to take code out of your processes there and move them into your back-end procedures and functions. Then you're more likely to reuse them. You can use more sophisticated management tools in the database for analysis and so on. Keep those boxes
I like that.
small.
Keep those boxes small.
Good
I like
advice.
that.
Good advice.
That's a tweet. And do you do you take your own advice, Steven? I heard
I break my advice on a regular basis. There's no question about that. But and for example, in the DevGen, I could show you.
Go if you have something that so we don't normally do a ton of.
Show you some of my bad code? Is that what you want me to do?
Well, you've mentioned showing us a few times. If that's something you want to do, please feel free to share your screen if you wanted to do so.
Sure. Let's see if I'm still connected here.
I see here. Let me know if do you want me to show that or not?
Well, no. The problem is I dropped out of the VPN because I wanted to make sure
that's okay then.
And so I can't show you the DevGen backend code. Yeah. So let's just stay put. We've only got 20 minutes or so left.
Steven, I have a question. As you flip through your 6th edition, and is there something in there? I don't know if it's object types or what that you go, man, I can't. This is so cool. And there's never really been a massive, adoption of this. Like, what is one of the things that you think, I can't believe more developers aren't using X?
Well, pretty simply, it would be collections. Collections are PL SQL's versions of arrays. And I've got to say, we didn't do the best job possible with them. We started introducing collections in Oracle 7.3. And then we did a big boost with adding nested tables and V-arrays in Oracle 8. Mm-hmm. And so it's been this kind of incremental approach. So we end up with 3 different types of arrays with 3 different sets of properties and different features. And it's kind of a mess. And I think that's probably limited pickup of the features to some extent. But I'm still doing sessions on collections or on bulk processing. And people are like, collections? No, never work with them. And it's a little bit mind-blowing because there's so much you can do with them. And obviously inside Apex, you've got Apex collections that are built around similar technology. So that would be one of the core pieces of functionality that I think people have not taken advantage of. Rich just posted a little message about addition-based redefinition. Sure. So EBR is a feature that was first added in Oracle 11, got a big upgrade in Oracle 12, and EBR allows you to essentially at least aim for zero downtime of your applications. So historically, Oracle applications built around database objects, SQL and PL SQL, when we've had to do an upgrade, we'll have to like recompile packages, add new tables, modify tables. Generally, we've had to take the applications down, put them in maintenance mode so we can get these changes in place. And that was okay for a while. But in today's world of 24/7, everything, and especially the internet, companies can't afford to have downtime. So EBR was introduced to address that. If you could hide that one because it's distracting, we'll come back to that one in a second. So with EBR, the idea is that you basically have additions within your database. So I have my current edition, my root edition, then current editions, and I can put changes into a new edition. And until that new edition is active, the application is still working with all the old objects, and I can sort of ease users into the new edition. For PL SQL only changes if you're recompiling packages. It's actually really easy and simple to use. For changes to database objects like tables, they get more complex. But still, if you have absolute clear zero downtime or minimum really small downtime requirements, then you should definitely look into EBR. Now, I don't mention that as an underutilized feature because it's actually not a PL SQL feature. It's a big database feature, and we could probably talk for years about all the big database features that are underutilized. But in PL SQL, I would say that the collections are one of the things I would think everybody should be and would be using. And I still find people who are not.
No, that's a good answer. What about objects? Do you use a lot of objects? Because I never really, because the purists will say it's not object oriented, but I used them on occasion.
So way back in Oracle 8, Oracle responded to the punditry, essentially. The people out there were saying, oh, you need an object relational model. And this was partly because Ingress and Informix, talk about going way back, came out with these blended models sooner than us. And so we had to catch up. So we added things called object types, which essentially are classes. First several versions, it was pretty limited to functionality. At this point, as far as I can tell, you could take an entirely object-oriented approach and build your backend entirely out of object types. You'd put a lot of code in packages that are then called in the object type procedures and functions and the methods. But I think it's pretty robust now. The bottom line is that not many people do it or will do it because they don't need it and they're not trained in that. I certainly use them on occasion, but not very much, often as simply an enabling mechanism for something else. So for example, if I wanted to do a nested table of records, I couldn't. I can only do a nested table of object types. So I create an object type that looks like a table and mimic it and some things like that. And of course, Oracle uses object types for lots of different technology, from JSON to XML and so on. And actually, that's when object types got a lot faster too. When we started using it internally to implement features of our own, then it was like, oh, wow, we got to fix this stuff. And we did. So they're there. I think they're robust enough for people to use, but it's never going to be a big deal for us because we don't generally follow an object-oriented paradigm.
Right. Right.
I did want, sorry, Monty, if you don't mind, I did just want to show Morton's comment because I think it's a useful tip. Back to when we were talking about keeping those boxes small, Morton's offering a tip on how you could actually find your big chunks of code where we aren't keeping the boxes small and at least identify them and move them to a package. So I thought that was a really great tip and worth sharing.
That's a really great tip. And another great tip that Morton or somebody else in the community could share is the SQL that does that. Then people will really do it. So Morton, I look forward to that tweet.
There's a challenge to you. Post it in the comments.
All right, I'm not making any more comments in this talk.
That was a great tip.
It was, yeah.
But Steven, this is one of the things I thought we'd lead with, but we got into the conversation just got into kudzu, and then we took a couple of questions. We did a session back, I think it was in Chicago. I think it was our Insum vendor session where we talked to Joel and to Mike, and we got into their journey and that kind of stuff. You mentioned you started with Oracle in '87, but like when did the light go off for you? What was it about PL SQL that really just spoke to you, that you said, okay, I found something here that I can make my life's work? I mean, what was, tell us a little bit about your journey.
That's a level of planning that's never been a part of my life. I pretty much just fell into programming, first of all, in college. I took, I think, 3 101 computer 101 classes. That's the extent of my formal training, and fell into a programming job in Fortran back at the University of Rochester, like 1979. And from there, kind of just graduated into additional programming jobs, Fortran, and then ended up with some DEC machines and DEC 10s, DEC 20s. And I think, what's the name of the first database I worked with? The 2020 database. Anyway, I was just basically just moving from one thing to another without any real plan or career in mind. And but I was getting really, really bored. And then one day I was checking the wanted ads, and there was this ad for Oracle. I thought, well, I guess I could go. I worked with databases. It was 1022 was the name of the database technology on DEC mainframes. And so I went and got Codd's article on 12 rules of relational database, and studied those up, and went to start my interviewing process. And number one, never asked me a thing about relational database and what I knew about them. They just wanted to know about my speaking capabilities, because it turns out it was a dog and pony position. It was an SE going out and helping salespeople sell technology. And what's really fascinating there is I've been involved in political stuff for years, and back then I was doing a lot of work around Central America and what Ronald Reagan's administration was doing in Central America. And so I was actually on a national level organization called Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. And so Bob Cordell, the guy who was interviewing me, said, "So do you have any experience speaking with presenting to large audiences?" Like, yes, I do. In fact, I've spoken to large audience, small audiences. So my political work helped me get my job at Oracle, which kind of amazed me. So I just fell into that. And I'd always liked tinkering. So even as I was an SC, going out and doing presentations, I would tinker. So for example, the first time I did a presentation, so I had to go through my training and so on and so forth. And then we had a seminar in Wisconsin. In fact, I was going through some files, and I have the matchbook and the thread from the first hotel I stayed in for an Oracle event.
You're a collector, Steven.
Wow, something. Up in Milwaukee.
What order you?
Now, back in those days, what I did as an SE was stand up and run a SQL Plus script with pause commands and say, here's the table. Now you want to see them in the date that they were entered? Here's an order by. Like, whoa, an order by, a join. Those are the really good old days. But of course, that script wasn't good enough for me. I had to make changes to it. I made changes to it. I did not test it well enough. And in my first presentation as an SE with, of course, my manager in the audience, I run my script and it's got errors.
Oh, no.
He didn't fire me. He was very kind about it. But that's my nature, is to constantly tinker and play around and build things. So I ended up actually doing I built one of the first CRMs actually at Oracle for the regional organization in Chicago, and then it started to be used nationally. And that was SQL Forms version 3. That was my first taste of PL SQL. And maybe I just got excited about PL SQL so much because I started with SQL Forms version 2.3. I don't know if either of you
away your age.
I wasn't doing anything with that.
No PL SQL. It had triggers that had steps, and you would code the steps, and there'd be branching, and I actually built recursive triggering, and it was crazy. So PL SQL was like, wow, this is great. And then when it hit the database, I started using it there as well. But really, fundamentally, what it comes down to is that I got lucky because PL SQL was easy enough for me to grasp and talk about and write about, whereas if it was C or something else, I probably would have just been totally lost. So when an opportunity came up to write a book, I said, I'll write a book about, they wanted to write a book about Oracle 7. And I said, well, I can't do that, but I can write a book about PL SQL. And they said, oh, okay, do that. And it worked out.
The rest is history.
The rest is history, yeah. And since then, certainly wasn't, so Monty, there was no plan at all. Certainly I had no expectation that the book would become as popular as it did, that I could literally do nothing but PL SQL for the decades since. And again, somewhat to my detriment, because I was able to not keep up with SQL as well as I should have. So my SQL skills are, they're okay, they're basic, but having Connor and Chris, that's great. Yeah. For example, we had materialized views that run daily, recomputing rankings on the dev gym when we were doing daily quizzes, and they were taking hours. And Connor's like, what is this garbage? You got it down to like 30 seconds or something like that. It was just insane. So you really, if any teams out there, if you don't have somebody on your team who's really good at SQL, you don't all have to be, but every team should have somebody who's really good at SQL, really comfortable with PL SQL, and at least be resources for you. If you don't have that on your team, chances are you've got some really good low-hanging fruit to improve your applications when you get that person on your team.
Yeah,
or you train yourself up.
That's an important point, Steven, because even like at Insum, we've got some just fantastic Apex developers. But really, I'm finding more and more the only place I can really help them, because they're fantastic. They've eclipsed me on the Apex development side, no doubt about it. But on the database side, on the SQL side, I can still answer questions and fight fires on the SQL side. So
and you don't have a technical role at Insum, is that right?
Oh, I wear this one and a whole bunch of other hats.
Yeah,
I'm not really.
That's great that you can, and it's great that your company says you've got some skills. Help out, great.
Well, it's we haven't been typecast. That's for sure. That's
nice.
for sure. I do, Michelle. Do you have another question? Because I do have one more question that I've been kind of saving for last. But looks like we've got a few coming in.
Now, this one, I'm sorry, I just don't understand.
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer in this format.
So see if you get some clarification on that.
Yeah,
one, the next one.
Owner, if you want to send in through some more comments, and we'll try and get to that in a bit. Rich.
What's Rich got for us here? But
there's a follow-up comment.
Actually, that's a good point. Before I turn it over to you, Steven, you mentioned a strength can be a weakness with Apex, and I think with Apex, one of the strengths that can be a weakness is there's few barriers to entry. They do make it so easy. Before I got into tech, I was actually in building trades, and it was the same way. There was few barriers to entry. Anybody that wanted to slap a sign on the side of their pickup door could call themselves, a contractor, roof, or whatever. And so it's kind of that way with Apex. There's few barriers to entry, but Michelle knows there's a difference between knowing Apex and knowing Apex. But yeah, I think that was a good point you made earlier.
Well, and I'd rather have that problem than, oh, I'm sorry, you can't even think about touching this language or tool unless you're an expert. But it was the same thing with SQL Forms. I mean, Oracle actually has a surprisingly long history of being very successful in the app dev environment. We've created some really good low-code tools for decades. I think we kind of lost it a little bit with Oracle Forms 4. It was just a major disaster for a long time. Actually, SQL Forms 3 was supposed to be the first mouse-driven tool from Oracle. And that totally didn't really do that, but we lost some initiative and momentum around when Power Builder came in and took a lot of our business on the app dev side. But yeah, I think our history is really good, but it's always been this approach of how do we leverage the database? We have this great database. Let's build a tool on top of the database that takes maximum advantage of it. And I think it's very much a winning strategy in today's world, of course, where people have moved away from database, where they just live at that top surface level of how does it look and how quickly can I get the next iteration of my user interface out for understandable and justifiable reasons. It tends to diminish the critical nature of the database and then hide the value of these data-driven applications.
Hey, we have a question from Francis. Do you have any insight you can share with us?
Well, sure. So I'm sure you all know that we released the preview version of Oracle Database 20C early in 2020, and you haven't seen anything since besides that preview release. So you will be seeing some new releases of Oracle Database coming up really soon. They will have some really cool stuff from PL SQL. Pretty much the main thing is a major expansion to the power of iterators. So probably the best way to describe this, if you're working with collections, for example, and I want to iterate through a collection, and the collection is sparse, it's got missing elements between index values. You've got to write some cumbersome, it's not rocket science, but it's kind of cumbersome coding that you have to basically tell it how to skip over those gaps or you get an error. Really doesn't seem necessary. So in the next iteration, you're going to be able to say literally things like for index or for in the indices of the collection. Go do it. And so we're pushing the smarts down into the database. It's more declarative programming. Essentially, the lessons of Apex are the lessons we need, and SQL. Really, it started with SQL. The core power of SQL is don't write a program to do the data manipulation. Tell us what you want us to do, and we'll figure out how to do it. That is the core power of SQL. That is the reason that SQL became the powerhouse it is as a data manipulation language. And in PL SQL, what you need to do is search out every declarative element you can and use those declarative elements as much as you can. Same thing in Apex, right? You don't write code if you can do it declaratively. And so you're just going to see more and more over the years of PL SQL doing more and more for you, taking less and less of the coding off of you. So there'll be major expansion around iterators. Some of it very intuitive and simple and really great. Some of it will just blow your mind. You'll be able to say for like I, in, and then you've got parentheses, and you got multiple different controls. So you might go from 1 to 10, and then go in reverse from this expression down to that expression. I don't know if anybody's ever going to use it, but you'll be able to in PL SQL, just like in those other languages. So that's, I think, going to be the biggest impact on a day-to-day basis for PL SQL developers. Are there plans to integrate GraphQL with Apex? Unfortunately, I'm the wrong guy to ask. I'd say that.
Yeah.
And GraphQL, I think it's still pretty early for us in terms of determining how we want to support it generally.
Monty, didn't that question come up when we had Jeff and Chris on?
It did. It did. I have. I'm already hitting on an Apex page. I'm hitting an existing GraphQL server. But what Chris Rice was talking about is maintaining your own server. And
I think they're looking at how Orange will support GraphQL.
Yes,
exactly,
correct.
Exactly.
And I think that was something that they were definitely looking at and had in the works.
Led us to believe it's going to happen. They're definitely looking at it.
I'm certainly not going to say anything either way on that, since they've had their say.
Yeah, they did. They did start with the safe harbor agreement, so we'll see. Michelle, I had one last question that I was gonna ask. Did you have something else for Steve before we?
No, I mean, we had a long list of questions. One thing's true that we didn't have to worry about how we would fill an hour. We could go on and on. I think we'll have to have Steven on again because, we didn't even get to talk about.
No.
Maybe there's lots of things that we didn't. Yeah,
there's a long list of things that we could.
There's a long list, but
why don't you see if people like this one first, and then we can decide if you want to bring me back.
Okay.
By the viewer numbers, I can tell you we've had a lot of interest.
I'll bet the over. Yes, I will bet the over. So the question that I asked Michelle the other day was she had an interesting answer to it. So I'm going to ask you too, Steven. You might want to sit down.
Get ready, Steven.
You've never been asked this.
Monty.
Would you rather be attacked by 100 duck-sized horses or one horse-sized duck?
One horse-sized duck for sure.
Okay, why is that?
I can't even imagine figuring out how to defend myself against 100 of anything. With
but
the one horse-sized duck, I can probably run away.
Ducks. They're ducks. They're small.
No, they're horses.
Nobody agrees with me.
They're horses.
Duck size, but they're small.
I bet they're really cute too.
I really need our audience to pipe in here because I can't be the only one. Like a horse-sized duck, you guys, you stand.
But couldn't you outrun a horse-sized duck pretty easily?
Well, that's
could you outrun 100 duck-sized horses? I don't know.
Those would kick and bite, but the horse-sized duck could fly. There's no way you could get rid of that.
A horse-sized duck could fly? No, it couldn't fly.
I mean, a horse-sized duck. Yeah. The wingspan would be like 20 feet.
So, folks, now you know some things about Monty that you didn't know before. These are the kind of things that run through his head.
Yes, and he makes.
And I'm not going to volunteer to tell you what runs through my head.
It's dark in here, man. It's dark in here. Hey, Steven, we wanted to have some fun with you today. We wanted to talk about why and not the how. The how is in your book, all 6 editions of it. So we wanted to kind of hit the fringe elements of it, and I think we really covered a lot of the things that we wanted to talk about.
Absolutely.
Michelle?
Yeah, thank you so much for being on. I'd say one thing, you're great at many things. You certainly aren't great at selling yourself because you've
I'm not?
everything. Well, no, I think like I can't do this, I can't do
this. Oh, you mean no, that's an excellent selling strategy. Are you kidding me?
All right.
All about managing expectations.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's it.
But it's been a real pleasure. We definitely want to have you on again if you will come back.
Sure.
Yeah, Mark, if you want to show. So we have a few things coming up on December 10th. We have Todd Sharp and Guillermo Ruiz who will be talking about OCI Cloud Native on December 17th. We have Peter Raganich and Matt Nolan from FOEX who will be joining us. Then we will be taking a break for the holidays, Monty. I think well deserved. Would you agree?
Yeah, I've got to do some shopping I haven't even got you anything yet, Michelle. So I've got to get out there.
You've still got a couple of weeks. And then we wanted you to join us tomorrow. We've got Anton and Hayden that will be presenting their Apex Instant Tips. A little birdie told me that there might actually be a little bit of an argument tomorrow. So you want to check in, tune in there.
Vicious.
Be contentious.
Vicious. And that's it from me. Steven, thanks again. It was a real pleasure having you on.
Great to be here. Appreciate it. All right, take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Steven, you will always be a mentor of mine. I really appreciate all the things you've done for me personally in my career, and I'm speaking for everyone on the call. I know they feel the same way about you.
I appreciate it.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Keep bringing the passion, my friend.
I will.
Michelle, cue the music. We'll dance on out of here. And thank you all again for joining us on the Insum.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, yeah. Did you know?
You've been listening to the Insum Insider.